North Korea. For over 70 years, the country has been ruled by one family. Its tyrannical leader, Kim Jong Un, has subjected his people to extreme hardship.
The regime survives by repression, by complete blockade on information with the security services and field tactics.
At the start of the pandemic, North Korea sealed its borders. We now know next to nothing about what's been happening inside the country.
Sometimes people describe North Korea as a black hole of information, and that black hole has become significantly darker over the last few years.
For months, we've been communicating in secret with 3 people who've risked their lives to expose the disaster unfolding. We've used animations and actors to illustrate their words.
These days, watching and sharing foreign videos is severely punished.
One wrong move, and you're facing execution.
And a desperate struggle for survival.
Food supplies are so low, people have started dying.
I want to live in a society where we don't starve, where my neighbors are alive, and where we don't have to spy on each other.
I've been working as the BBC's correspondent in Seoul for just over a year. And for all the time I've been here, North Korea's borders have been shut. I knew these border closures would be having a big impact on people's lives. So when I arrived, I wanted to find a way to hear from people inside the country. North Koreans are forbidden from talking to anyone outside the country, particularly journalists. There are a couple of specialist news organisations that have a network of sources in North Korea. We decided to try and work with one of these organisations to speak directly to people in the country so that we could understand what was happening. One of these news organisations is Daily NK, based in Seoul.
Hello, 안녕하세요.
Lee Sang-yong is its editor-in-chief.
I'm sorry we're a bit late.
저희가 북한 내부에 같이 저희에게 정보를 전달하는 그런 소식통이라고 하는 그런 분들이 있습니다. 분들하고 좀 친한, 그리고 어떻게 보면 이런 북한의 안 좋은 현재 상황, 이런 부분들을 외부에 알려주고 싶다라고 하는 의지를 가지고 계신 분들을 저희가 섭외를 했습니다.
So what happens to our questions now?
그러니까 뭐 기기라든지 그런 소프트웨어를 이용을 해서 저희랑 협력하고 있는 북한 주민들에게 전달이 하고, 본인들만 알고 있는 그런 장소, 뭐 도청이라든지 이런 것들이 불가능한 그런 장소, 조사가 은밀하게 좀 진행된다라고 보시면 될 것 같고요. 보다 안전한 방법으로 올 수 있다, 오고 있다라고 이해하시면 될 것 같습니다. 시간이 조금 걸리더라도 가장 안전한 방법을 써야 되고, 현재는 계속적으로 그렇게 써왔다라고 생각이 듭니다. 그래서
Well, we will wait as long as it takes.
For months, we exchanged hundreds of messages with the sources in North Korea, each containing just snippets of information to protect people's identity and keep them safe. Until finally, we had enough to put together.
I woke up at 5 a.m. and make breakfast for my family. Then I go and prepare my business at the market, where I sell medicine.
One of the people we've been communicating with is a market trader who lives up near the border with China. and she makes her living by smuggling medicine over the border from China. Her earnings support her family, so her husband and her 2 children.
Before COVID, life was stable. I didn't smuggle every day, but my business made quite a profit. But since COVID, my earnings have halved. It's become much harder to smuggle things over the border, and the crackdowns have become stricter. I tried to smuggle, but I got caught. I had to bribe an official with money I didn't have, and barely got away with it. After that, I was monitored, and I couldn't do anything. Most of the products in the market came from China, but it's empty now. You could always find grain, but not these days. Our food situation has never been this bad. Recently, people have been knocking on the door asking for food because they're so hungry.
코로나 이전에는 일단 사람들이 왔다 갔다 할 수 없었습니다. 이게 약간 불법적인 방법이긴 한데 밀수를 하시는 분들은 그 밤에 넘어가서 어떤 물건을 팔고 다시 물건을 가져오는.
North Korea has 2 borders. The one with South Korea is closed because the 2 countries are technically still at war. It's the most heavily fortified border in the world, known as a demilitarized zone. To the north is a vast 1,300-kilometer border with China. Through closing its borders, North Korea not only stopped people from leaving and entering the country, but it cut off trade. So they stopped freight trains from even crossing the border from China with vital supplies of food and medicine.
I work on construction projects. Often we have to work late into the night and I sleep at the site.
This person, who we're calling Chan Ho, lives near the Chinese border with his family.
I wouldn't be able to survive if my wife didn't work at the market. Food supplies are so low, people have started dying. It's been so long since we received government rations. We somehow survive on what little food there is, but it's hard not knowing how much longer we will live in this pinched poverty. The future is dark.
Hundreds of miles away, in the relative luxury of the capital Pyongyang, lives a woman we're calling Ji-yoon.
In the morning, I put the rice on to cook before waking the rest of the family. Then I start my job at a food store. I used to be able to sneak some fruit and vegetables out of the store where I work to sell them at the market. I'd use the money to buy rice, but now they thoroughly search our bags, so we can't make a side hustle. My family doesn't have enough food. My husband and I survive by thinking 10 more days, and then another 10 days, thinking if something happens, we might starve, but at least we'll feed our kids. Once, I didn't eat for 2 days. I only drank water.
I think it's really interesting that we have somebody even from Pyongyang speaking about how hard the situation is. It's affected Pyongyang as well, which, speaks volumes.
There are lots of beggars now. If they're lying down, we check them and usually find they're dead. There are others who kill themselves at home or disappear into the mountains. I never used to hear of this happening. I know one family that starved to death at home. No one came in or out for 3 days. Water was brought around and we knocked on their door telling them to get some. And nobody answered.
In our village, 5 people are starved to death. In one family, their wife was too ill to work, so 2 children were surviving by begging. In the end, all 3 of them died. The official cause they were given was death from disease. In another household, the mother was sentenced to hard labour for violating quarantine rules. She and her son starved to death. Recently, an acquaintance's son was released from the military because he was malnourished. Suddenly his face became bloated. He died within a week.
We had reports and rumours that perhaps some people were starving, but I had never expected that 2 out of the 3 people we'd spoken to would know people who had actually starved.
For the past 10, 15 years, we rarely heard of death by starvation. That was something that happened during the late 1990s or early 2000s. But to hear it happening again, in the past 2-3 years, I think, it is taking us back to the arduous march, which was the most difficult period for the North Korean people.
In the late 1990s, when Kim Jong Un's father, Kim Jong Il, was in power, as many as 3 million people died in a devastating famine known as the Arduous March.
The Red Cross estimates that almost half of North Korean babies will die before they're 5.
The North Korean economy had collapsed, meaning the state could no longer provide its people with food.
Disastrous floods mean North Korea is desperately short of food. Many now rely on international aid to survive.
People quickly learned not to depend on the government for food. They started smuggling things in from China to sell at markets. Ever since, most North Koreans have depended on this unofficial trade. When the border was closed, this lifeline was severed.
With the restrictions in general that have been increased, that is really worrying then for North Korean people's ability to fend for themselves.
Before the border closure, people would attempt to flee the country by secretly crossing into China. More than 1,000 made it out each year. But Kim Jong Un has spent the past 3 years building fences along the border, cutting off people's only escape route.
People are faced with multiple layers of security if they're trying to cross. There's been widely publicized threats by the North Korean regime, the North Korean military, that they will shoot people on site who are trying to cross into China.
The government strictly controls the border, using COVID as an excuse. But really, it's to stop the smuggling and people crossing the river to China. If you even approach the river, you'll be given a harsh punishment. There's almost nobody crossing now.
Every day it gets harder to live. One wrong move and you're facing execution. If I live according to the rules, I feel like I'll starve to death. But just by trying to survive, I could be arrested by the state security, branded as a traitor, and killed. This is the hardest period I've lived through. The famine was difficult, but the state completely lost control. So there weren't these harsh crackdowns and punishments. If people wanted to escape to China, the government couldn't do much. Now there are fences and surveillance equipment. A friend's son told me about several closed-door executions he saw. Each time, 3 to 4 people would be executed. The crime was trying to escape. People are stuck here and waiting to die.
We showed our interviews to James Heenan, the UN investigator for human rights in North Korea.
Wow. Okay. It's quite sobering. I read a lot of sobering stuff, but that's very sobering. It's very eloquent as well. This information that you have secured, it's disturbing, but in terms of the things that are probably the most shocking, if that's the right word, is the emphasis on the fear in people's lives. These interviews suggest that people who have lived through different waves of repression are saying, no, what's happening right now is particularly bad. And in the past, we've been able to deal with it, but this is getting even towards the edge of what they can bear.
I wanted to understand why the government would be willing to push its own people so close to their limits.
North Korean government has always been indifferent to the suffering of North Korean people. North Korean state is about Kim family, and it's all about the regime survival.
To ensure his survival, Kim Jong Un has funneled his country's limited finances into developing nuclear weapons, which are now so advanced they can, in theory, reach the US mainland.
North Korea needs to be able to justify the deprivations, the suffering of the people. So North Koreans say, we have United States that's a hostile power, we have South Korea that's hostile to us, there's Japan that's hostile to us. And nuclear program is the only thing that protects North Koreans against the hostile powers. We have to spend money, we have to build up nuclear program, and this is sort of why you're suffering.
North Koreans have little choice but to believe what they're told. With no access to the internet, the only way they can learn about the world outside their borders is through foreign videos smuggled into the country on USB sticks. Closing the border has helped Kim Jong Un to keep them out.
These days, watching and sharing foreign videos is severely punished, so people are more careful. A lot fewer people watch them.
It survives by repressing their people, by complete blockade on information with the security services and field tactics.
At the end of 2020, Kim Jong Un passed a law declaring those who share foreign videos can be executed. Ru Hyun-woo is one of North Korea's highest-ranking defectors. Until 2019, he was working as an ambassador for the North Korean government.
북한 주민들이 이 우식의 변화를 가장 두려워하느나 이걸 보면서 한국을 동경하게 되고 소방 세계의 물질이 풍부한 그런 소방 세계에 대해서 환상을 가질까 봐 젊은 친구들이 지금 생각이 완전히 다릅니다. 우리하고는. 그러니까 국가가 당이 김정은이가 네가 우리한테 해준 게 뭘 있어? 당신이 우리한테 뭐 굶어 죽지 않게 뭘 해준 거 있게? 불만이 쌓이면 불만이 차곡차곡 쌓이면 이게 어느 순간에는 분노가 표출이 됩니다. 예.
I was taken in for questioning under the anti-reactionary thought law. Since then, I never reveal what I really think to others. I'm more afraid of people now. It's very scary, especially the way they're punishing young people. At a court in Pyongyang, the local leaders were gathered to judge a 22-year-old man in a public trial. He'd gone around spreading South Korean songs and films. His punishment was 10 years and 3 months in hard labor camp. Before 2020, this would have been a quiet trial, with perhaps 1 year in prison. People were shocked how much harsher the punishment was.
You shouldn't be reprimanded, let alone jailed or even executed for consuming foreign media. They are very serious violations of human rights, and in fact, in the past, the Commission of Inquiry of the UN has said that these can, in many cases, amount to crimes against humanity.
Despite the government's best efforts to keep its people in the dark, there are small signs that loyalty to the regime is waning.
Before COVID, people viewed Kim Jong Un positively. We hoped perhaps that he'd rule in a new way. But now almost everybody is full of discontent. If there's a war, the people will turn their backs on the government. That's the reality.
After our supreme leader met with the US, people were filled with hope and laughter that perhaps we would be able to go to foreign countries. We were tricked. This border closure has taken our lives back 20 years. we feel hugely betrayed. The people never wanted this endless weapons development that brings hardship to generation after generation. My child doesn't have food. I just want my family to have 3 meals of rice a day. I want to live in a society where we don't starve, where my neighbors are alive, and where we don't have to spy on each other.
Nobody believes the propaganda on TV. The state says we are nestling in a mother's bosom. But what kind of mother would execute their child in broad daylight for running to China because they were starving? People, including me, openly say that they hope there is a war here as soon as possible. Only by getting rid of the entire leadership can the people live. Let's end this one way or another.
I think that what these 3 North Korean people are sharing through these interviews does support the idea that North Korea is even more repressive, even more, totalitarian than it's ever been before. Sadly, these interviews may be a preview of just how difficult things are for North Korean people today.
The COVID pandemic has provided Kim Jong Un with an opportunity to tighten his grip over his people. When he does finally reopen the border, it's unlikely their old freedoms will be returned. The fear is that this new era of repression could last for decades.